chemicals. And what 1399 could do is to remove some of those PFAS, redefine those PFAS. And I guess technically, if you're in Indiana, some of products could be made PFAS free, which would not be truthful. It would just be according to the definition in Indiana. So keep an eye on House Bill 1399. It is going to be heard testimony only in the Environment Committee. I will be having an environment public meeting on Tuesday at 10:45 to hear from environment advocacy groups on really important issues facing Indiana. If you're interested in being a part of that, that will be taking place. I don't know if we'll try to get a virtual option as well, but that will be taking place in room 125 at the State House on Tuesday. Groups like Hoosier Environmental Council, Citizens Action Coalition, Soil and Water, some very important, the Conservation Law Center, they will be presenting at that meeting. The House Bill 1363, controversial wetlands bill that removed protections for some of our isolated wetlands, that was signed by the governor this week. And that was, that's not a good thing if you care about wetlands and the environment in Indiana. It was controversial. There is a controversial bill that is, I guess, redefining the development of restrictions on slopes in Indiana. It made its way through the House and now will be heard in Natural Resources this week. It's House Bill 1108. That is a controversial bill to keep an eye on. And in health, I know this is League of Women Voters, but in health, we will be hearing a bill that on its face looks helpful. It's House Bill 1418. It looks like it's expanding long-acting reversible contraceptives for women. However, it was amended in the House to remove IUDs from that bill. And removing those IUDs, which are the most effective, popular, safe contraceptives in Indiana, in the most popular in the United States, it's removing those. The bill says that an individual, after giving birth while in the hospital has to keep these on hand and offer them if they are an appropriate use for that patient. But 1418 has now been amended to remove IUDs, and so hospitals won't have to have them on hand. And the fear about 1418, as it has been amended, is it would be easy going forward, maybe next session, to say that Medicaid will only cover those contraceptives as noted in House Bill or House Enroll Act 1418, which means IUDs could be no longer Medicaid qualified for an option for contraceptives. That's the concern of 1418. Started out good, is now a bill that could really, in the long term, remove more reproductive freedoms and access to health care when it comes to birth control access for Hoosiers. So keep an eye on that bill. I'm going to be trying to put that language back in the bill while we're in Health Committee on Wednesday. So if you care about those issues, I would really encourage you to reach out to the Health Committee members, especially the chair, to accept that amendment and put that language back into 1418. So that's kind of an update on what's happening on the Senate side. It's going very quickly, and we're doing all that we can. I actually kind of want to hear from Matt on a House resolution that actually sort of gets us involved in the term limits of U.S. senators and House members that we're actually hearing this week in, I think, in Judiciary. Strange place, as I was looking at why it was there, but I would love to hear more about how that moved through the House. But that is actually on the Senate. It's on the Senate agenda this week. So there's a little update from me. I appreciate everybody being here, and can't wait to take your questions.
Shelley, thank you so much for those opening remarks. Matt, I would invite you now to give your opening remarks.
Okay, let me talk about just the scheduling. I don't think from the House side of things that we'll be getting out on the 28th of February, because it's just, unless they would have to announce next week that basically everything is like shutting down early. So I think that's a little unlikely, because our deadline for bills to be out of committee in the House is February 27th. So if there are bills that are not yet out of committee, if they don't get out of committee by the 27th, then they'll be dead. The deadline then for the bills that did get out of committee to get past the second reading phase, which is the amendment before the full House stage, that's February 29th in the House. And then our third reading deadline to have everything, all the Senate bills that are going to move back out of the House over to the Senate is March 4th. And so kind of what I'm hearing, I mean, it's interesting at the State House, because there are always these great rumor mills about when we're going to get out or how things are going to play out. And you can never be sure what's really accurate and what's just kind of a lot of speculation. But I'm thinking, if I had to bet, I think under the statute, we could be in session through March 14th. I think it's pretty likely that we're going to finish about a week early. I've heard some people suggest we normally don't meet on Fridays, but I wouldn't be surprised if the last day were Friday, March 8th. And kind of what all that depends on is, normally you have a lot of conference committees where the House and the Senate kind of fight over bills they both pass, but in different forms. And so they're trying to agree upon what the ultimate final form of the bill will be. The Republican leadership has really been leaning on people saying, like, we don't want conference committees this year. You need to get with your Senate counterparts and, figure out how you want your bills to read. And then you need to consult each other on amendments so that you can simply concur, which is just approving a motion on the floor of the House to agree to changes made by the Senate. And the Senate would do the same to what we do in their House bills. So I think what they're trying to do is get it set up so there are not many conference committees at all, which means that you would just be voting on a lot of concurrence motions. And so I think what they're going to do is squeeze down, basically we'll have March 5th, 6th, and 7th, 3 days to do conference committee reports. Maybe only 2 days if you want to get out on Thursday. If the House actually decides to use that normal off day on Friday the 8th, then you would have the full 3 days for conference committees. But I think they're basically going to tell people, you got a couple days to cut your deals with the other House and get your stuff in, because we're going to hit the road by the end of that week. I think that's my best kind of guess on what's going to happen, but it's really hard to know. Everything changes up there from day to day. So that's just my best scheduling guess. On legislation, what I'm really kind of most fixated right now on is Senate Bill 202, which is this strange higher education bill, where the Senate author of the bill claims he's trying to solve a problem that has, he claims, been uncovered by public opinion surveying of students in colleges that they claim that there's evidence that conservative students don't feel comfortable speaking in class. And therefore, we have to do something to help our conservative students who are too afraid to speak up in class. And so the answer to that, according to this bill, is to first create an additional requirement for faculty that would be reviewed every 5 years, and they could be disciplined if they don't pass this litmus test. they would have to show that they are presenting all views, all scholarly views, as they say, on their subjects that they teach. So it's a very strange situation. It's kind of vague as to how it would actually be executed. There's probably a big fiscal impact, review all this. But the bottom line is they're kind of building this narrative of tenured professors who are untouchable because of the tenure, and they're just indoctrinating students to leftist ways and bullying all the conservative students, and therefore we got to act. So that's like the first most egregious, outrageous thing is they want to basically, have all the professors nervous about what might happen if it turns out that their particular scholarship they're teaching is not embraced by their conservative students. The other thing that it does is it further politicizes the board of trustees of the state institutions by taking away 2 alumni appointments from each board and replacing them with people appointed by the Speaker of the House and the President pro tem of the Senate. And the other kind of argument that I heard being made by the author of the Senate bill, oddly enough, Senator Deary, I understand, represents Purdue. So I find this a little bit strange that he would think his constituents would want this kind of legislation. But he's kind of making the argument that these tenured professors are running amok with their leftist ways, and we have weak, inefficient trustees who are not addressing the matter. So he has to step in and do it through legislation. Now, this is very curious to me because a majority of these trustees are appointed by the governor, and we have had Republican governors for 20 years. So apparently Senator Deary thinks that the Republican governors in their trustee appointments are aiding and abetting some kind of, leftist indoctrination program in our university. So the whole thing is really kind of silly, but it's dangerous. And so we're working to try to stop that. And it's got a whole host of other provisions of ways that students can complain when they think their professors aren't being nice enough to conservative viewpoints, and ways for the Commission for Higher Education to be like some kind of appellate board. So if you complain to your institution as a student that you think you're not getting treated fairly in a classroom somehow, then you can go up to the Commission for Higher Education. They theoretically would be some kind of review board, although that's kind of vague too. So that bill had a very long hearing in the Education Committee in the House. It was scheduled for a hearing only. So we're waiting to see. I'm hopeful that maybe they just won't schedule it for any more action, and that will be that. They could schedule it for what they call an amend and vote only, where no other testimony be taken on the bill, but the committee could go ahead and amend the bill and pass it out, or just pass it out as it is. So I think that probably by Wednesday of next week, we'll have some idea of what's happening. Or if we see a schedule for the Education Committee come out next week without that bill on it, that'll also let us know that perhaps the House is not going to move on that. Another thing that I'm going to attempt to do this week, we have Senate Bill 135, which deals with redistricting of like city councils and local units of government. We've had a problem where a lot of cities and towns need to redistrict their elected districts because the populations have shifted and they're not really complying with the constitutional requirement of one person, one vote. But there have been some communities kind of dragging their feet on that. So Senate Bill 135 is attempting, I think, to try to create a situation where they'll actually do that. I'm going to use that as an opportunity, since that bill's about redistricting. I'm going to offer a bill that will create a task force which has the job of basically recommending the legislation that would create a nonpartisan redistricting system on all these different levels of government. So I'm hoping to, if nothing else, get some more discussion going about that, because if we start working on that issue of redistricting now, we have time to do all kinds of different options. If we need to amend the Constitution because we want to put in some different system, we can do that. There are ways you can have nonpartisan redistricting under our current Constitution. So you could take that path as well. So I'm going to offer that as a second reading amendment to Senate Bill 135, and we'll see how the majority responds to that. Another bill that I'm co-sponsoring is Senate Bill 150, which deals with artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. It essentially creates some committees of experts that will look at artificial intelligence and figure out how, in a safe way, we might be able to use artificial intelligence to make government more efficient. So maybe it can, make the bureaucracy run better. So that's kind of interesting. And then there's also a cybersecurity piece to it, where again, you would have some experts in that area looking at how we, particularly with their local units of government, can make sure that they're engaging in best practices and things to keep from having these ransomware situations and a lot of negative impacts when they basically have their systems hacked and kind of taken over. It's interesting because the local units, which don't have a lot of resources and maybe not all the expertise they would like, they've had to kind of deal with this world foisted upon them. And I think in the beginning, the initial response was, well, we'll just buy insurance to protect us from this, and we'll pay those premiums, and then we won't have to do this really grinding hard work of how do we make sure our systems are as good as they can be. And now the insurance companies, I think they paid enough claims that they've cranked their premiums way up, and they've kind of reduced what they'll actually cover if you have some kind of cyber attack. So I think that we're getting to the point where, anybody's got a computer in government, they're going to have to understand what the protections are, what they need to do for cybersecurity. So that's just an attempt to move that along. And I think this is maybe one place where state government actually has managed to be helpful to local units of government. That is not always the case. But the Indiana Office of Technology, I think, has been having a lot of informational sessions and doing things to help local units get software and things they need at more affordable prices. So that's good news there. Okay,
you have about 1 minute left to talk about Shelley's challenge.
Yeah. Okay. So Representative Hall, those two bills that Shelley mentioned, Representative Hall had this resolution calling for a constitutional convention for congressional term limits. I think that's just like a message bill. They know that's not going to happen. And I made the point on the House floor that if you have a constitutional convention, at that point, everything is wide open. They think they can limit it to one topic. But I told them, I said, I think some people will be talking about doing some surgery on the Second Amendment and all these gun issues if you have a constitutional convention. So careful what you wish for. But, we pointed out the irony that this resolution thinks term limits are great for Congress, but maybe not so great for the legislature. So that was interesting. 1108 is the slopes bill. That is again, a Representative Hall bill. That is a response to requests from developers here in Monroe County who don't like the slopes requirements that we have to avoid soil erosion and other impacts on the environment. And so that bill basically was made to apply statewide, but it's really aimed at Monroe County to limit how steep of a slope you can actually have regulation for development and things. And I guess the one good thing about the bill is it does exempt the Lake Monroe watershed. So that's a little bit helpful, but it doesn't protect any other watershed in the state that might be impacted by that. So did I cover all the Shelley questions?
I guess that'll be for Shelley to say, but it seems like that's so. Did you have anything else for your final or opening statements?
No, I think we should probably get to questions.
Okay, sounds good. The first person who has indicated an interest in asking a question is Claire Nysonger. And so, Claire, I would ask you to unmute, and Matt will let you go first with answering this question.
Oh, we have a union of concerned scientists on campus, and they've just put out an email about denying tenure altogether to professors, and also eliminating any DEI education. Are these really to a point where they could be a danger?
Yes, I think that there's some steam, kind of picking up for that kind of thing. So the Senate Bill 202 is monkeying with tenure already with these 5-year kind of, political reviews. So that's one thing that would impact it. it's interesting because Senator Deary on Senate Bill 202 claims that he is actually strengthening tenure in some way, because he's got some language in the bill that says that when you're reviewing these professors to make sure they've been balanced, they have to show they have intellectual diversity and are providing all these conservative viewpoints along with whatever other viewpoints they're presenting. He's put in there that in the process of that, you can't infringe upon their First Amendment rights. You can't punish them for criticizing the institution. He's got some different things in there, which he claims is actually providing kind of a statutory underpinning of tenure. So he's acting like he's doing people a favor on that. But I'm a little bit skeptical. So, I mean, there's no one has yet proposed getting rid of tenure here, but I think that if Senate Bill 202 becomes law, I think you could probably guess that in a year or two, someone will come along with the bill, say like, why don't we get rid of tenure completely? Because people in the legislature don't understand higher education or how it works. And a lot of people like to say that tenured professors just, once they're tenured, they have this job for life. They get to be lazy. They don't have any oversight. And, you know, it's a horrible system. Of course, anybody who works in higher ed knows that's not true, that they're, you know, people have reviews every year. We have to do those reports about what we've actually done in the past year. And so part of our challenge is going to be educating legislators about, you know, how tenure actually works and what tenured professors do when they're tenured.
Thank you, Matt. Shelley, would you like to address that question?
Yes, Matt did a great job. I would add that it was testimony on Wednesday in the House, and it will be voted on, amended and voted on this coming Wednesday. So the amount of mobilization that has occurred around Senate Bill 202, it really needs to continue, apply that pressure. If it can come from throughout the state, which so far it hasn't just been an IU effort. It has been Ball State, Ivy Tech, Purdue, Indiana State, you know, all of our state institutions have done a good job. One of the areas that I think is effective is really encouraging the business community to come out and apply some pressure, because Senate Bill 202, yes, it does impact tenure. And I know that Senator Deary thinks that he's strengthening tenure, but that is not how the bill is written. He thinks he's written it one way, but there is serious concern about 202. But I think one effective argument is the way that this will tie the hands of state universities, and then therefore I think private universities sort of see the writing on the wall, but how this is going to be able to attract and keep tenured or keep academics in Indiana, but then be able to attract students to study here. How are we really preparing students for, you know, the 21st, 22nd century workforce? I mean, world of work. And I think what's really important to not forget about are the grant dollars that are coming into our state from these, from our academics, that money, once they decide they're not going to stay someplace where their tenure is in jeopardy, they will leave, and that those dollars go with that researcher. So Senate Bill 202 will be only amend and vote on Wednesday, but your advocacy and mobilization is important to try to kill that bill in the Education Committee this week. After this week, if it makes it through Education, it will go to the full floor of the House. So up, you know, keep that pressure up. That's what I would add about Senate Bill 202.
Thank you very much, Shelley. Okay. Penny Giffens actually had a question, but she had to leave. And so part of her question had to do with House Bill 1108, the slopes bill. And she says it won't really increase housing stock or affordable housing. And could you discuss that a little bit further? So this time, Shelley, can you maybe address her concerns?
I think Commissioner Giffens, Penny, you are right. House Bill, what is it, 1108?
Yes.
And the wetlands bill, this 1363, it's sort of sold to Hoosiers as a way forward for affordable housing to address our, housing concerns and, the need to build more affordable housing or to have more affordable housing. But when you start to ask those questions, it is so expensive. And the availability of at least what 1108 would be able to, how 1108 would be able to address access to more housing or development. I think this is an effort to address the affordable housing with a non-answer. I mean, this is not the way forward. It's too expensive, and you are correct. I think there are many other things that we could do in the state of Indiana to address affordable housing, access to housing, and 1108 and 1368 are not the best way forward for addressing those problems. So I appreciate you staying on that. We're going to be keeping a close eye. I'm glad that it's actually in natural resources, and Senator Glick is hearing that bill because she tends to be more sort of mindful of protecting natural resources and protecting our the environment. So we'll have to wait and see. But you're right, Commissioner Giffens, and I appreciate your leadership in that area.
Matt, would you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, the affordable housing thing, that's just a political talking point. It's not a serious effort. So the home builders, who have many members who are actually legislators, they recognize that many people in Indiana across the country are frustrated because our housing stock is limited. Interest rates are higher than they have been. Affordability housing is an issue. So you have a lot of people who'd love to be able to purchase their first home, and they're just not in a position to do it. And they're frustrated about that. And when we know that when people come to our community to take jobs, they struggle to find, suitable housing for themselves. So that's a real issue. And the home builders have kind of grabbed onto it, and their number one answer to it is to just remove all the regulations. So if we didn't have a lot of planning and zoning, if we didn't have all these building codes, we could just go out and build a lot of housing, and then there'd be a lot of supply, and the prices would come down, and we'd live happily ever after. And that's just their political perspective. And so, every attempt to deregulate things, they just couch it in terms of, oh, this will help housing affordability. And I don't think there's really any proof of that. But that's a standard talking point now.
Thank you, Matt. We have a question next from Kathy Roundtree. Kathy, I would like to ask that you unmute and ask your question of our legislators.
Hi, thank you. My question is for Senator Yoder. Senator Yoder, could you talk about the reasons for removing IUDs from the long-term contraceptive options?
Senator Yoder, would you like to go ahead and answer that? I know you went first last time, but since she directed that question to you, if you would like to respond first.
Can you repeat the question? I was dealing with a little bit of an emergency on my end. So sorry, can you repeat that question?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for your advocacy for reproductive health for the women and men in Indiana. My question is, what was the rationale given by the people who put the amendment in to remove the IUD option?
So the rationale was that IUDs are contraindicated for women after they give birth, and that is just simply not true. I think that they're starting to feel pressure from Right to Life, the Right to Life group in Indiana, and they have gotten, they're making this argument that IUDs are abortifacient contraceptives, and because of that concern, the language was taken out. And there is right now 1426, which is that bill, I misspoke. That bill now will only cover patches, and it will only require hospitals to keep non-IUDs, so long LARCs, excluding IUDs and IUPs. Hospitals will have to keep patches in stock. The fear is going forward in next session or another session that it could refer to Medicaid covering those contraceptives as listed in 1426, which are the excluding IUDs and IUPs. So that is the concern, and why, as I think the Right to Life is really moving toward, we heard this, that's, if we, pass, an abortion ban in the state of Indiana, which we did, that slowly access to contraceptives, birth control will be next. And we're seeing that with 1426. So that's the concern, that's the argument. And if you care about this issue, we need to act now to make sure that the language is put back into the bill, and that's what gets passed, or the bill is defeated. 1426.
Thank you, Shelley. Matt, did you have anything to add with regard to that bill?
Yeah, I just think you have members who think the IUD is basically an abortion, because I think they claim it prevents implantation of a fertilized egg or something. I have to admit, I have about zero knowledge on this topic, so I don't know much about it, other than it is this creeping kind of thing. So they've gotten this pretty much ban on abortion passed after the Dobbs decision, but they, during that process, complained that it wasn't restrictive enough. And so they will definitely be back. And they have this very, kind of expansive view of what abortion is. And so I think that they feel an IUD somehow for them crosses a line into this abortion world. And that's why they wanted it out. Our Representative Rita Fleming, who's represents the Clarksville area down across the river from Louisville, she's an OBGYN, and she's our caucus's point person on this, because she actually, is an expert in that area treating women. And so I think she's been trying her best to get a strong bill, but I think that she's trying to navigate through to at least get something done that might benefit women in this area. And, she's the person who has to deal with the non-scientist members of the legislature with their political views of things.
Thank you very much, Matt, for weighing in on that particular topic. I want everyone to know right now, I just have one questioner in the queue, and that is Mary Coy. I'm going to be asking her to unmute to ask her question, but I'm also asking the audience, please address one question moderator if you have some questions, so that we can keep our discussion going and taking advantage of our valuable legislators that are here today. So Mary, if you would like to unmute and ask your question.
The question was to Senator Yoder, and she answered that question, that her concerns about the IUDs is House Bill 1426. So thank you. That was my question.
Okay. Well, then I am going to go back here and just their Pamela Davidson was in line to ask a question at one point, and she had to actually leave. But her question basically was, she's asking that you guys, our legislators, if you would discuss our filthy streams, rivers, and the fact that they may be the worst in the country, and coal ash ponds. Can you tell us if there's any hope in those areas? Matt, would you respond first, please?
Yes. I don't think there is hope until we get new leadership in our state. And we have an election coming up where we get to make some choices about that. And so people need to get engaged and get involved on that. The environmental record of this General Assembly, and the governors have gone along with it over the years, is just horrible. They do not see any environmental issue that needs to be addressed. Their greatest focus is on the polluters and making sure that they're not overburdened as they manufacture things or produce things. And that's just the reality. And then they put people in charge of, they make in charge of the Environmental Affairs Committee, that the environment is not a priority for them. And so that's why we end up with this situation. And one thing that really, to me, proves the point is, you know, every interim, usually in the fall, we have these things called, they call them summer study committees. It's kind of funny because they don't really meet in the summer anymore, but interim study committees, the official title. And these study committees consist of mostly people from the standing committees in the House and Senate that would be voting on bills related to particular topics. So I serve on Utilities Committee. There's a Senate Utilities Committee. Members from both those committees get together in this interim, and they kind of study, discuss, get testimony on issues that relate to utilities. The Environmental Study Committee, interim study, has not met for years. So the leadership of the House and the Senate, the Republicans basically, decide which committees are going to decide which topics every year. That happens in May. And they never assign a single topic to the Environmental Interim Study Committee. So I think it's really great that Shelley is going to try to give the public an opportunity to come in and talk about things we could be doing to protect the environment that we're not. And, you know, we do have a lot of impaired streams. You know, it's interesting. I remember one year I attempted to just get past a requirement that you had to put up a sign warning people who might be fishing in impaired streams. And that have a lot of pollutants in it, particularly like the Ohio. If you like fish bottom dwellers in Ohio, you're going to be eating a lot of heavy metals. And they didn't want to do that because they recognized that if you actually put a sign up everywhere in Indiana where you had an impaired river, there'd be like signs all over the state. And people might begin to say, like, well, why is it that every river you're not supposed to eat the fish out of it? And so there's just not an interest in the environment. That's just a sad reality. And until the voters kind of demand that somebody pay attention to it, it's not going to happen.
Thank you, Matt. Shelley, would you like to address that question?
Yes, I mean, I really appreciate this question, and I kick myself because I don't know why it's taken me this long, but about week 2 of January, I, out of frustration, said, wait a minute, why am I waiting for someone else to set a meeting? I can set a meeting and we can hear these issues. So we started getting busy. We've been, you know, putting out invitations for people to come and hearing from the experts and moving forward toward the interim, that we can have some environment committee meetings. I mean, I might be the only one there, but we will encourage full participation to begin to have an impact on addressing the, you know, the quality of our drinking water, which is so poor, the quality of our air that we breathe, our soil health, some of these issues. I mean, the fact that we are only meeting in environment to hear some of the most dangerous bills, to pass those bills, but we're not meeting to address these other serious health long-term environment impact bills. So we're going to change that. If anybody can make it on Tuesday, that would be terrific, but we will be reporting on that. Again, that environment public meeting is this Tuesday in room 125 at the State House. And I will say this, I was given a hard time and I was told as early as late as Friday that there's a chance that I could be bumped from that room if they don't want me to meet there. But it was a hassle to try to reserve a room, a space, when there is space available. But right now it's in room 125, and if we have to find another room pretty quickly, we will. But we will be having a meeting on Tuesday at 10:45 a.m.
Thank you so much for taking the initiative on that situation. Related to that, because I haven't gotten any new questions yet, so everybody out there, please be thinking of questions. But when myself and a couple of other league members were at League Day, we had a speaker that pointed out that there is no comprehensive water plan for Indiana. And that has led to the situation where Boone County is proposing to take a big slice of Tippecanoe County's water, I believe, and there are no protections for another community against something like that happen. And I'm just wondering, is that something that is going to be potentially on the radar for Indiana? And Shelley, I'd ask if you could address that first. It seems like there's a lot of protection for water utilities and not for the populace, the communities.
I tried to work on some legislation for this session to file. And in working with, I mean, I had several different stakeholder meetings. And when I met with IDEM, they said, we want to work with you on this because we would agree. We have mechanisms in place to provide some of this, but we just don't have the staffing or the funding to do it. So I think this will be it'll be a heavy lift, but it'll be an important one as we prepare for next session when it will be a budget session. We need to know exactly what does that water plan, what do we need for the state of Indiana? What is the funding? What's already in place that is not that we're not able to do because of the lack of funding? So hopefully on Tuesday we'll get a better direction on how to move forward and at least start the conversation about putting together a water plan for the state of Indiana. That is one of the goals of the meeting on Tuesday.
Thank you very much, Shelley. And Matt, do you have any response for that?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting because the State Chamber of Commerce, probably 10 years ago, maybe longer, came in and said they were concerned about droughts leading to water shortages, and the manufacturers that relied upon lots of water for their manufacturing processes might get nudged out by people's everyday use of water. And so they actually got a number of study committees back then that were created to look at that issue. And I don't think they were able to come up with something because it's a very politically charged issue. And even under the best of circumstances, if you're really trying in good faith to come up with a good plan, in the end of the day, you have to decide whether you just leave all the local people in charge of their water, which is, I think, what people want, or you have to decide who's going to be able to override the local units and start to have water moving around. Now, this is coming to a head whether anybody likes it or not, because you've got this crazy thing where the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, quasi-governmental entity, went out and bought all this land in Boone County. And, instead of just doing what they normally do, which is subsidize corporations that say they want to come to Indiana, they decided they would be the developer themselves. And, I think they want to bring in, hoping they can bring in some chip factories or something. And those are heavy water intensive manufacturing processes. And so at some point after they've gotten more than halfway through this thing, they figured out like, oh, we don't have enough water here. So then they looked around, it's like, okay, we can just pipe it in from 50 miles away from Lafayette. Well, obviously the people up there don't like the idea of hundreds of millions of gallons of water every day getting sucked out of their supply. And so because a couple of the governor's candidates on the Republican side ran the IEDC and were involved in this process, the current governor, I think, wanted to avoid this issue from becoming a food fight that would impact the Republican gubernatorial primary. So he kind of grabbed this issue about, do we take water from Lafayette? And he kind of sent it over to the Indiana Finance Authority, which has had some experience with this because they hand out money and bonding for water projects. And they told them, you go off and study it and don't give us any answers until after the election. So they pretty much just put the thing on ice, but it's going to have to be dealt with in the upcoming long session because, you know, I don't think it's politically possible for them to just kind of bully through moving that water from Lafayette down to Lebanon. I think there's going to have to be some legislation that addresses it somehow. So that issue, I think, will be on the agenda in the long session coming up next year.
Thank you very much, Matt. We have a few other questions. And the first one is Rosalind Householder. Rosalind, I'd ask that you unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Rosa.
Rosalind, sorry.
It's maybe totally irrelevant, but the talking about the IUDs reminded me that in previous incarnations of the anti-abortion Christian thing, there were fights, and I don't know what happened in the end, but it's much easier for a woman to get her tubes tied to prevent pregnancy altogether when she had a cesarean. And there were efforts to make that illegal, to not allow her to have her tubes tied. And I don't know if that was each state working with Medicaid, but I was just where Indiana stands on that since I've only been here a couple of years.
Okay, Rosalind, thank you. Matt, do you have any information for Rosalind on that question?
Yeah, I don't know if Shelley has some more detailed background on this. I don't think we really have, I'm not aware of a policy on that in the state. I think that what I know, Representative Fleming, who I said is an OBGYN, I think she's trying to address that issue because I have read a lot saying that, you know, when women have delivered a child or they've had a C-section and they want to have some long-term contraception, or permanent contraception, that's the time to do it. And yet the women are not always getting offered that option. And so I think that's the issue that is perhaps Representative Fleming is trying to address in some way, but it does get tied up in all this abortion issue, which is crazy. I mean, I can tell you that it's probably been, more than a decade ago, there was a bill moving through, I think, to try to restrict abortion in the old days when it was a constitutional right. And I'd seen that former Senator Vi Simpson, she was in the Senate, she had offered a bill that said for the purposes of Medicaid funding, contraception was not abortion. And I simply had that amendment and I put it up on second reading. It was defeated. So, I mean, that kind of tells you how the majority thinks about that. There are a lot of people that, don't even like contraception because they have religious objections to it. So it's just always going to be a struggle in this space. But I don't know if we actually have anything on the books about that at this point. I think they may be silent on that.
Thank you, Matt. Shelley, do you have any information to add on that?
Maybe not, but I will say that ACOG is very much opposed to 1426 as it is currently written with that amendment in it, because they do see it as a sort of a stepping stone to the next bill, and that would be to only fund through Medicaid contraceptive options that are covered under 1426, which would remove IUDs. And I I just want to reiterate that either the misconceptions or at least the messaging around this, that IUDs are abortifacient, are wrong, is not truthful, and it is creating, I think it's going to create more hurdles for people in Indiana to access the most effective, the most popular, the safest birth control in this state. So 1426, the desire to have it bring greater accessibility to contraceptives in the state of Indiana could end up, if it remains as it currently is written or amended, providing more hurdles to accessing birth control in the state of Indiana. So it's just like a mechanism. So, putting that language back in 1426 will be critical, because, there was this, talk that if we, that with the fall of Dobbs, that slowly it would be access to birth control. And we're sort of seeing this unfolding, and it's not easy to recognize. I had to, we have organizations in Indiana that work really hard to protect access, like Women for Change. And so they have been advocating for 1426, and they are continuing to advocate for 1426. However, I had to spend some time educating them that as it stands now, it's actually going to be taking some steps backwards for accessing contraceptives and birth control for people who need access and want access. So it's a little bit of a bait and switch, but I would ask, if you care about these things, 1426 as it currently stands is not good policy for the state of Indiana.
Thank you very much. Our next question is to come from Charlotte. Is it Zeitlow? I'm not sure if I've pronounced that correctly. Charlotte, if you could unmute and ask your questions, we will be directing it to Shelley first. Charlotte, are you there?
I think Charlotte's question was about what is the rationale for changing the makeup of the trustees and giving a political appointment to the supermajority in the Senate, the majority leader in the Senate, and the majority leader in the House. And I think the bottom line is to provide a political appointment. The reasoning is because we set their budgets, but we are interjecting, we're injecting politics into the Board of Trustees. And I think it's just bad policy. But that's what I was told. Why, when the author of the bill was pressed on this, and I think it's important to note, the trustees' language was not in the bill originally. And when this bill, Senate Bill 202, was first heard in education, the amendment to include, it originally had 2 appointments from the pro tem leader of the Senate and the speaker, or maybe it was 4 of the legislative council. I can't remember, but whatever the case may be, it was worse than where it stands now, but it was 4 appointments. And I could see physically on the face of Senator Deary, whose bill this is, he was not too excited about that. He did not want to put any political appointments onto the Board of Trustees for state universities throughout Indiana, but it was an amendment that the chair of education wanted, and it passed. So he amended the language to make it less political, but they still have one appointment each. But I know it wasn't the language was not original to the bill. And why? To give more political sway, to put more pressure on our Board of Trustees.
Thank you, Shelley. Matt, would you like to address that question?
Yeah, I think this is part of something I've noticed kind of happening in the Senate from afar. And I think that Senator Garten, who's in their leadership, I understand, he's introduced legislation. There's been legislation floating around in the Senate that really wants to have the legislature take over the executive branch. I mean, they want to put legislators on all these rulemaking boards. And I think there's a constitutional issue because they basically want to invade the executive branch and kind of take it over, at least have a bigger say on what happens there. And I think this is an odd side effect of the fact that there's this core base of the Republican Party who has decided that Governor Holcomb is a dictator because he actually tried to do some rational things during the whole COVID pandemic. And so I don't know, where the heck this trustee thing came from. I'm sure they're thinking, hey, we can put some culture warriors on there to really push this issue because they're not happy that the trustees have not decided to embrace the issue. But what they're essentially doing is they're repudiating their own governor who has a majority of appointments to these boards. And their answer is to take appointments away from, or elections in some cases, from alumni and give them to these political hacks. And by the way, I'm cynical enough. I think what really is going to happen is big donors to the Republican caucus in the House and the Senate are going to get these appointments, like presidents hand out, ambassador jobs in warm climates. And so I think that you're likely to just see that people who've written really big checks are going to end up being trustees, and they will enjoy the courtside basketball tickets they get as a part of their service to the university.
Okay, very interesting. I'm going to ask a question myself based upon this attack on executive power. There was a bill proposed to take away the governor's emergency powers that were used during the COVID epidemic. Can anyone tell me the status of that? Matt, could you address that first?
Yeah, nothing has come through the House that I recall that addresses that issue. So I think they must have left it alone. You might remember that they had the bill that right now the Constitution says the governor has the right to call special sessions when necessary. And the Republicans passed this bill that said if the governor has an emergency that lasts a certain period of time, then essentially the legislature can call itself back into session. That bill got passed over the governor's objection and then was struck down by the Supreme Court. So it will be interesting to me to see if those bills ever do get traction and pass, what the Supreme Court will think of that attempt to kind of really get into the other branches' powers.
Thank you for that. Shelley, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I don't. The language sort of limiting the power and calling a special session when there is a state of emergency, that did pass through the Senate. Matt, it sounds like it didn't get a hearing in the House. Is that what you're saying? I don't remember the bill number. Senate bill.
Yeah, I haven't seen it come to the floor yet. I mean, there is another week, and I don't know which. I'd have to kind of track down which committee that it went to. But I've kind of been looking through the list of bills set so far, but there's a lot of them. So we're at this point where it's kind of like a giant kind of blob or bubble of bills. You have a situation where not much is in the committee, and then you have just so much going on at once, you have a hard time even keeping track of it because it's like this big kind of bubble of bills coming down the pipeline. So as I've said in the past, you never really know for sure anything's dead until the legislature adjourns sine die, because things can come back to life in some odd ways. But so far, I have not seen that in the House.
Okay, thank you very much for letting me throw that in. The next individual we have a question from is Maria Douglas. And so I'm going to ask Maria if you would please unmute and ask your question. It will be directed first to Shelley Yoder.
Hey, Shelley, it's Maria Douglas. So for context, for everyone else, my 4-pay job is with Middle Way House. And then some work that I do is with a new Asian American, so Hoosier Asian American Power advocacy group for clearly Asian Americans in Indiana, predominantly women. Or those that identify as. And so we're concerned, and we had 2 of our core members, and we talked about this at the NAACP celebration, Founders Day, a little bit. And I was wondering what we know about HB 1264 and how it harms Hoosiers by creating more barriers to voting.
Okay, Shelley, would you like to answer that?
Well, I haven't 1264. I'm going to have to look that one up. I don't know where that one stands. I'm going to check it out right now. I don't know.
Let me jump in, Shelley, since that came through the House already. Yeah. So what happens every year is the Republican Legislative Chairman Wesco runs the Elections Committee. They're just absolutely convinced that there are all kinds of people from out of state registering to vote, all kinds of non-citizens registering to vote, and they feel that the current registration system is not doing enough to identify unqualified voters and getting them off the rolls. And so what they've been doing is creating all kinds of new bureaucratic requirements of kind of documents and things that the voter trying to register needs to provide. Then they're trying to give the voter registration people the ability to go and like check your credit report to see if it thinks you live where you say you live. And of course, credit reports are, notoriously inaccurate. And so they're basically just creating this giant mess, which will make it harder for people to register to vote. And if they get through that gauntlet, then it's going to, create situations where they may get kicked off the rolls when they're actually qualified. And all that for what I think is kind of an imaginary kind of Donald Trump MAGA, they're stealing all our elections kind of world that has infected the Republican Party. And so, Democrats in the House fought that bill, spoke against it. But of course, it's moving along because when it comes to voting and things, they just have this idea that there are all these cheaters out there they have to get. And by the way, in my opinion, I think they like the fact that only half the people in Indiana vote, because when you have lower voter turnout, you can have a supermajority much more easily. If we had people, 80% turnout, I think you might start getting different results at the polling places.
So Maria, just a little, it is on the agenda for elections this week. Thank you for the heads up. I'll keep an eye on it, and we'll see. I'll touch base with Senator Ford and Senator Hunley are on that committee that I work with, and I'll touch base with them on how it's going to be amended and how it makes it through elections this week, and then we'll hear it. That'll be on Monday at let's see here. Doesn't say what time they meet, but on Monday it'll be heard, and I guess we could almost hear it on the floor for second readings on Thursday. So I'll keep an eye on it. If you have any, if you want to send me an email on what you'd like it, any amendments, I could get those drafted, and for second reading, make sure that the 1264 is as harmless as possible.
Legislature continues, at least in the election realm, to seem to try to fix problems that don't even exist. Problems, yeah. They have a solution for problems that don't exist, that are just confusing to me. With that said, earlier, Rosalind had put in the chat that she had a follow-up question, and I kind of overlooked that she had entered the queue again. Rosalind, do you still have a follow-up question that you would like to ask? I'd ask you to unmute and let us know.
I think I did ask that one about fallopian tubes, and although I
Okay.
guess the follow-up question to that is, are vasectomies legal in this state? Is it legal for a woman to get her tubes tied? They're not birth control, in my opinion. They're changing your body. It's a long-term choice.
Okay. Thank you for that follow-up question. Matt, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any laws that that prohibit that, but again, I haven't studied that area of the law, but I think there's nothing addressing that I'm aware of.
Shelley, would that be your response as well?
Yes, I was going to say, I think you can access that in Indiana, but I'll look into it for sure.
Rosalind, thank you for that follow-up question. And Kathy Roundtree, do you have another question that you would like to ask?
Yes, thank you. I would be interested to know if the legislators have any comments or suggestions as to how to approach the Attorney General's so-called tip line for education. It just sounds like such a negative thing, and I wondered if there are any approaches legislatively that could be taken to interrupt that.
Shelley, I think you are first up on this question.
Without any warning, I mean, I think we kind of knew that this isn't a surprise coming out of the Attorney General's office, this Eyes on Education portal, which for everyone, if you haven't heard about this, it was launched last week, and it provides a portal for an individual to provide name, address, and uploading the inappropriate material that they suspect or know is happening in their school. And then the office will do a follow-up of the complaint to verify and then make a decision on what to do about it. I mean, I'm going to say something. I think I was on many different levels, but at a basic one, there is nothing about this portal that protects minors or ensures that the individual has the permission of a parent or legal guardian to, number one, out themselves on a portal, provide their address, and upload inappropriate material. I'm not sure what kind of library the Attorney General is trying to create or why the need, but for me, it has all of these alarms, and it just, what's already been proven is that people are uploading things that are no longer, they're outdated. Some of the individuals are out of state. Some of the individuals don't even have children in our public school system or in the school system. So, it is problematic on so many different fronts, and we'll sort of see how this plays out, but we need to be active in addressing this. And I'm sure next year, if it's still up and running, we'll have to do something legislatively.
Thank you, Shelley. Matt, would you like to address that question, please?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a political stunt. The Attorney General always panders to that kind of most extreme MAGA part of the Republican base. His nomination is determined at a state convention of the most conservative Republicans. And so I think he's just, pandering. And the Republican supermajority hasn't shown much interest in reining him in at all. And I think that's because they fear that same base taking them out in a primary, because the legislature's gerrymandered the districts to make them lopsided so that the primaries are where the decisions are made about who represents the citizens of Indiana in the legislature. And so they're not going to do something to poke Todd Rokita in the eye that's perceived as poking the MAGA base in the eye, because those people will then take that legislator out in the primary. And so that's just the reality of it. So what can you do? Well, the Attorney General is up for election this year, and we can all get engaged and get involved in the political process and get out and work hard for whoever the candidate is that'll be running against Todd Rokita. And that's the ultimate solution. I mean, I hate to sound cynical or like I don't have any hope as far as what the legislature, but there has to be signals sent from the voters. And it is possible, even under these structural roadblocks that have been thrown up, for people to make a difference. But you have to get involved in the political process pretty actively, and you got to try to get all of your disconnected relatives and friends and people who don't think politics matters or don't pay attention to the legislature, and you got to help get them educated and out at the polls. And that's going to be the ultimate solution for all of this stuff.
Thank you, Matt. I have to say personally, it's embarrassing to be a lawyer when you see a lawyer like Todd Rokita doing the things that he's doing. So we do have another question, and Karen Lunsford has indicated she has a question for the legislators. So Karen, if you would like to unmute and ask your question, we will direct it to Matt first.
Okay, thank you. Matt has pretty much answered my question, because it was, what can we do to activate voters? Indiana, I think most of our voters are middle of the road conservative rather than far right. And I think it's pretty obvious that our legislators are leading us farther and farther right all the time. I really appreciate Matt and Shelley's efforts, because they are obviously working for all Hoosiers rather than for big money. And I guess I'm really concerned because I've read a fair bit about Project 2025, and I've been following Christian nationalism. And I can see both of those movements being fed into our legislation by many of our legislators. So why is there so little discussion about Project 2025 and Christian nationalism? That isn't the way I wrote my question to start with, but that's the way it went, and I apologize for changing the question, but I think that really gets to the root of some of the things that we're doing. And really, Matt and Shelley, thank you for all of your work.
Thank you, Karen. Matt, would you like to address that question first?
Yeah, the one dynamic you really see in the legislature is the people who come from that wing of the party, who are very driven by their religious beliefs, really feel that America has lost its way because we have the emergence of all these diverse types of people that were marginalized before, and they really want to get back kind of to where everyone knew their place. Those people are very actively working the Republican primaries. I mean, they have political action committees they've created. They go out, they recruit candidates. And so those Republicans, because of the way the districts have been drawn, they don't fear getting tossed out in a general election. They don't fear upsetting moderates or independents or middle of the road voters. They fear getting primaried. And so, for example, the person who authored the amendment to defund the Kinsey Institute, which ended up in the budget, was a person who defeated kind of an establishment, if you want to call him that. He was a pretty darn conservative guy, but he wasn't kind of MAGA conservative. He got taken out in the primary, and it kind of surprised people. And so that person came in, and her first big priority was to defund Kinsey. And so in that issue, you had a lot of people who knew that was just not a thing, but they weren't going to risk getting primaried and losing their seat over the Kinsey Institute. And so you can apply that to all these extreme issues. There are a lot of people on the other side in that supermajority who recognize that this is not a good agenda, but they don't have the courage to stand up and say, we got to kill this stuff off or not put up with it, because they believe they'll have a primary opponent who may be well-funded, by, a political action committee that is dedicated to getting people in that are more extreme than the people who are there now.
Thank you, Matt. The realities of politics today. Shelley, would you like to address that question?
So we'll have to, the Project 2025 and really advancing, it was initially, to advance, former President Donald Trump's candidacy, and now his second run for president, and this labeling of Democrats or anybody who does identify as far right as liberal overtakers of the government, of the United States, of our values. And you can sort of see this happening definitely, as Matt was saying, one candidate at a time. And it should have us all, paying attention to not only the general election, but to the primaries, how important it is to pay attention to those. And we'll have to wait and see. I know that, if you just look even at the amount of Republican candidates for Congress in Indiana, I think it's 51 candidates. We have 9 congressional districts. 51 individuals are running for Congress on the Republican ticket. That is, you could say, well, that is democracy, really a healthy democracy. But I think it's what it's showing is one party is seeing a lot of benefit, but you don't see that type of activity on the Democrat side of the ticket because of the gerrymandering that's gone on in the state of Indiana. So, it's this, even, within each party, it's sort of driving us to the extremes, and it's definitely taking hold. You're seeing it at the State House. I don't know how other people, but I think a couple of things that I think we need to be aware of, because it is, they're saying, this isn't a budget year and we're having to tackle some of these issues. And it does become more of this culture war kind of environment. What we're doing with minors in employment and addressing childcare concerns, the childcare deserts that we have in Indiana, all trying to do, tackle big problems. Number one, people don't want to live in Indiana, so they're leaving, and we have to address our workforce. And so we're going to, address that with getting minors into employment. So that's one issue. The other one is in addressing childcare. Last week, we heard a bill that came over from the House that is on unlicensed childcare facilities, so home-based childcare facilities, increasing the number of children that can be cared for in unlicensed childcare, home-based childcare. And these are childcare, home-based childcare programs that don't take into account the number of children already in the house that are either, the childcare provider is the parent of, the guardian of. Those number of children don't get put into the count. So we're increasing the number of children that can be cared for, and we're not addressing the safety. It's not even best practice. And I just don't understand why we are putting children at risk because we're not willing to, I guess, value or spend money on some of these problems. But I'd love to hear actually Matt's take on that and what you're hearing on the House side. But I'm hearing on the Senate, let's solve our problems by putting children at risk. That's just startling to me, but we're hearing it more and more this session. than we have before.
Yeah, whether it's child labor bills or, yeah, I thought it was interesting. The solution to the early childhood education issue was like, let's just deregulate it, which takes us all the way back to the bad old days. So it was a long struggle to get any kind of standards, and they're really mostly volunteer. They have these things they call pathways to quality and kind of get certified. And the hope was the marketplace would reward people who did the licensing kinds of things to show they had a very safe environment. And now their answer is like, well, let's just let more people just start a daycare in their basement and put some kids in there, and that'll solve it.
I would just add to the answers that you have already outlined for us that, you know, I think it's very telling that we've had these legislative updates and that the Republicans feel no need to participate. And I just think it's, and I have talked to our Republican legislators that represent me and told them, I don't understand why you are abdicating, first of all, the opportunity to talk with a broad spectrum of voters in this environment. And I just have to wonder in the back of my mind if they are afraid to defend the positions they're taking, again, because of the fear of being primaried, as you indicated. So it's just really disappointing not to have them here to speak on behalf of their positions in an environment that we try to keep very nonpartisan. And I think everyone here should reach out to their legislators and call them out on it and say, we expect you to appear and talk to us. That's part of their jobs. I think we're at a point in time where perhaps we can have a closing. I do want to give each of Matt and Shelley an opportunity. Do you have any closing remarks, first of all, that you would like to make to our session today? First up would be Matt. Do you have anything that you would like to say in closing?
Yeah, just quickly. So we've got about 3 weeks of this session left, and then people will be focused on primary elections and the general elections that follow. And so, you know, we just really have to get involved as much as we can on all this stuff. And it's hard, difficult work. I, you know, watched Jon Stewart's return to the Daily Show on Monday night, and, you know, he made this point. He said elections are important, but he said what he had learned, and I think from his advocating for 9/11 victims in Congress and first responders, is that, you know, democracy is hard work day in and day out. I mean, there's never any rest. I mean, if the democratic system's going to work, everybody's got to set aside some time to get informed, understand what's happening, know who's working for them, who's working against them, who needs to be held accountable, you know, based on what they want government to be doing. And, you know, you got to participate both in the legislative process and the electoral process. And that takes some time out of your day. So I'm preaching to the choir here because you've taken time out of your beautiful snowy Saturday to sit on a Zoom meeting. So I don't really need to lecture too much on this point, but just anything we can do to get our friends, neighbors, family members engaged, educated, informed, and participating will really help our democracy.
Thank you so much, Matt. Shelley, do you have anything you would like to say in closing?
I would just thank you and encourage you to stay engaged. I too listened to watched the return of Jon Stewart, and I was also, you know, moved by what he said because it's so true. You know, we put a lot of focus on voting, but that is, you know, we have to vote, but we have to do so much more. Democracy is expensive. It's relentless. We have to fight for it. And I appreciate everybody who's been on this call today and last week who engages. Continue applying that pressure, because I could do my job better if I would have an opportunity to hear from these other representatives, just to get an idea of, you know, what were they hoping for. What are they thinking with some of their legislation? And it's difficult when it's hard to get in front of them and to have a conversation. So thank you for putting these on. Continue to put them on. We can all do more. And I know I will continue to working hard, to work hard in the legislature, to take your concerns to the people's house. It is your house. And don't let us forget that.
Thank you so much, Shelley. We are blessed to have both of you here and working so hard in the legislature. I want to remind everyone that our next legislative update is only 2 weeks away, Saturday, March 2nd. So we'll get to see how things pan out going forward for Matt and Shelley and the other legislators. Please be sure to follow the Indiana General Assembly at iga.in.gov. Look up the bills you're interested, chart their progress, speak out, show up at Shelley's meeting on Tuesday. Do everything you can to stay involved and engaged. And even if you can't get other people engaged, you can still have conversation with them about things that you are doing and hearing about what's going on at the legislature. You'll receive a follow-up email with information from the co-sponsors of these legislative updates so that you know how to access the CATS broadcasts and also to stay up to date on anything else that's going on. I want to thank our legislators. I want to thank everyone who has taken time today to join us and ask your important questions. We appreciate Community Access Television Services for recording this. I certainly thank my team members that help me muddle through in moderating these sessions. Again, thank you to our sponsors, the League from Monroe County, Brown County, and Johnson County, and the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. I hope to see everyone back again on March 2nd, and maybe you can encourage a few other people to join us on that day. Thank you again, Matt and Shelley, for helping us to understand your hard jobs. Bye, everyone.